Hey guys, my name is Emma and today I'm talking to you about all the books that I read in March. So I read 9 books in the month of March. There were some hits, there were some misses, there was generally an interesting reading month overall. So today I'm actually going to go from my least favourite to my most favourite in March, because I've got actually some new all-time favourites, but I also have some books that I think will feature on my most disappointing of this year so far, so I kind of want to polarise that for you. The first one I want to talk about was the most disappointing read of the month and indeed of the year so far, and this may get me a little bit of hate on BookTube, but it is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I know. So for those of you who haven't heard of Daisy Jones and the Six, this is the hotly anticipated follow-on book from Taylor Jenkins Reid, who is of the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo fame from last year. Daisy Jones and the Six tells the story of a band called Daisy Jones and the Six in the 70s, their rise to fame, and then their swift crash and burn where the band break up in the middle of the tour. It's told entirely in interviews with both the band and various people connected to the band, whether they be roadies or sound crew or whoever they are along their way. I listened to this on audiobook, which is how I listened to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo as well, and I do actually think that the audiobook is very, very strong, and if it weren't for the audiobook I'd be giving this an even lower rating than what I did. My biggest issues with Daisy Jones and the Six were the lack of character development, and I felt like it was a very tired story that had been done over and over again, and I really didn't connect with any of the characters, and I didn't think it was particularly interesting, and nothing really happened. I have so many opinions about this book, and I have so much that I want to kind of unpack, that that's all I'm really going to say about it right now, because I do want to do a much longer in-depth video just dedicated to this book and indeed to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and doing a little bit of a comparison, because right now I feel like there's a lot going on in my head about it, and I only finished listening to it maybe on Wednesday, only a few days ago, so I kind of need to give it time to settle. I know I am in a minority here. I know that most of BookTube seems to be raving about this, so if you were keen on reading it, I wouldn't necessarily say don't, because it could just be me reacting negatively to a popular book, which does often happen. So the next book that I read that was a little bit of a letdown was George Saunders' Fox 8. This is a very thin book, kind of blitzed it in a day. It is told from the point of view of a fox who learns human language, and then his home gets destroyed because they're putting a shopping centre there, and it's just a bit about his life. I personally wasn't a huge fan of this. I felt like it was a gimmick that really didn't warrant being its own book. I feel like this should have sat in kind of a short story collection somewhere. It would have been fine. Also, so it spells everything phonetically, because the idea is that the fox wouldn't know how to spell English, because they would have this fox only ever overheard English, and that's how he learnt it. The problem with spelling things phonetically is it doesn't allow for certain accents, and it depends exactly on where you've learnt your English as to exactly how that English is going to be presented when written down. It's a lot of effort for not really much payoff in this book, and honestly just chuck it in a short story collection. Then I read Coraline by Neil Gaiman. Now I really did actually enjoy this, but I am not its target audience, so it was hardly the most engaging or difficult read in the world. This is a middle grade book, or potentially even younger, and it tells the story of Coraline, who finds a doorway in her house that takes her to this other realm where everything is fun and fantastic but also really creepy, and she has to try and defeat her other mother. Coraline is very well known. It's got that wonderful movie that's been made of it. Neil Gaiman is an absolute classic, and I've been wanting to read Neil Gaiman before, and I can recognise the craft here, and I thought it was really, really fun and exciting and interesting, but I'm not 10, so it wasn't as satisfying as I wanted it to be, because it was never going to be. This was a snack of a book rather than a full meal, shall we just put it that way. But cracking little story, and Neil Gaiman, I'm definitely going to try some more of your work now, because I was a bit on the fence. I didn't really enjoy American Gods, but this one might have won you back to me. Another book that I read in the month of March was Suicide Club by Heng. This one I read with Amy Gets Lit, who is a fantastic YouTube channel that you should totally be checking out, and is basically my BookTube bestie. Big love, Amy. We are hosting not really, me and her are doing buddy reads each month, and we're calling them the bibliotherapy sessions. So this is going to be our first month. I do have a full video coming out hopefully on the 7th of April, so this Sunday coming, where Amy and I, what we've done is we've given each other different questions about the book, and we are going to kind of talk about it in its own separate video, so do keep your eye out for that one. All I will say about the Suicide Club for now in this video was I think it was a cool concept that was not particularly well executed, and I kind of wanted a lot more from it, but you'll have to wait for my full video on that to find out more. Sorry. If you do want to join in, by the way, we are reading Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield this month. Amy's already started it. She's been tweeting me saying that it's amazing and I need to hop on that today. Super keen. So if you do want to get in on any of these questions, video kind of things, or you just fancy reading it with us, we're reading it through all of April. So join in. I'll link Amy's channel down below. You should totally go check out her videos. She is fantastic. Next book. Boy Erased by Garrard Conley. So this is a non-fiction book. This is a memoir about a teenager who willingly goes to a gay conversion camp for 2 weeks in America. It's like a 12-step program that he goes on, and it's a bit about his experiences, his interactions with his family, and his faith and how he's kind of ended up here. I really don't know how I feel about this book yet, and it's very difficult to talk about things like memoirs, especially when they're on really intense topics like this, because this was someone's life, so it feels very hard to make a judgment about that. In terms of just as a reading experience, this kind of ricocheted violently from, oh my god, that's traumatic and terrifying, to this is really mundane and quite boring, quite a lot. Very much dependent on exactly what mindset I was reading it in. A lot of it just seems so absurd to me that this kind of thing would end up happening in the world, because I live in a very liberal town, I went to a very liberal university, I have very liberal politics and generally hang out with people from all walks of life, and I would never consider somebody's sexuality to be something that would ever be an issue that you would have to fix about them. So the idea that that is something that is like genuinely held by people as a really firm belief just baffles me. And because of that, this book was a bit like, why on earth are you listening to these lunatics? But that's where you have to take that moment and pause and go, you are listening to them because you and I have had very different upbringings and we have very, very different belief structures and systems, and something that I consider to be just mind-bogglingly different and separate, and I don't understand how you could think that, can become somebody's norm and their foundation, and that's where the scary bit gets in. I would recommend people read this because I do think it was interesting and it sparked a lot of debates in my head and like kind of a lot of questions and discussions, even though the actual reading experience at times can be a little bit mundane in places, and there's a lot of talk about the backstory of his family, which I found a little frustrating, but fascinating, and I'd be really interested to see the movie. I think it might be one that translates better to the screen because you're just going to get that speed of it. Okay, now we're going to go into the ones which were sort of big hits for me, really enjoyable reads. So I just finished today, so even though this is the 1st of April, I'm counting this as part of March because I was desperately trying to get this finished in time for the Owls. So I finished off the last 50 pages today. As you can see, because I've been holding it up, it's Artemis by Andy Weir, and I had a really good time with this book. Like, it's not technically a good book. I mean, it's about let's go into what it's about. Let's do that first. Basically, it is Artemis is a city that has been built on the moon, and we follow our main character Jazz, who is a kind of a smuggler. She dabbles in a bit of kind of petty crime type thing, and she basically gets roped into this much bigger criminal plot going on that is linked with her city and kind of organised crime. It reads a little bit like if Mission Impossible were put on the moon. It's great fun, there's a lot of action, a lot happens, all the characters talk in that like slightly over stylized, a bit too quippy to be real kind of way. If I tried to sit down and write out the plot and then read it back, it would be absolutely ridiculous and like what on earth even happened, but it was so much fun whilst reading it. Like, it really does read like that classic action movie that you get to the end and go, I'm sorry, what? That is not how it would work in the real world, but that's totally okay. Andy Weir is of The Martian fame, and The Martian, one of the things I loved about that book so much was the level of science, and this book goes into that kind of detail as well. So even though the plot itself is a bit absurd, the science behind how we could live on the moon is, as far as I'm aware, pretty legit, and it does go into a lot of detail about what that would actually imply when it comes to things like gravity and oxygen and life support and like all the different ramifications for trying to keep a population both both alive and happy and like coexisting peacefully in a city in the moon. So for that reason, I really enjoyed it. I know Artemis seems to get a lot of bad rep in comparison to The Martian, but I really had a good time with it, and I totally recommend it. Another one that I definitely really enjoyed the reading experience of, even though it doesn't really hold itself together very well, is Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. So this is about a young girl who, it kind of actually spans her whole life, and she can't really die as such. Basically, if she ends up dying, her life gets rewound back to a point where those kind of forks in the road, turning points, if she had done something different, she wouldn't have died. So the opening few chapters are like the tale of her birth, and in one of them the doctor gets caught in like a snowstorm, so can't make it there in time, and the cord is wrapped around her neck, so she dies. But then we kind of like whoop, rewind back, and then the same thing happens, but this time the mum has got a pair of scissors in the room, and the like maid helps to cut the cord, and she's fine. And then this just kind of keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. This is set just before the so she's born like around the First World War, which means that she is a sort of young woman through most of the Second World War, and it goes beyond. The kind of big pitch for this book is the idea that she can maybe go back in time and kill Hitler. However, like there's a reference to that at the very beginning of the book, literally the first chapter, and then it barely really comes up again. And honestly, I found that whole subplot of it really dull. Like I wasn't interested in that at all. It felt like a gimmick to get the reader invested, and then it kind of got left by the wayside and not really looked at. But I really enjoyed the characterization. I loved the kind of moving forwards and backwards and the different ways that life can go. I found it fascinating, her time during the Blitz and living through that, and the different kind of brushes with death that she had that she managed to miss, and then the ones where it happened, and then like those kind of points in life that seem almost inevitable. And it was a really wonderful interweaving discussion of kind of the choices that we make and the life path that you end up on, and the little moments where if I hadn't done this, or if I had done that, or if I'd gone here this day, then I wouldn't have done X, Y and Z, and that wouldn't have led to the life that I have now. And it's just fascinating, those like tiny little sort of drop of the water ripple out effects that happen that you don't even know about in your life, which is just absolutely fascinating. Also, Kate Atkinson's writing is gorgeous, so I would be on board for it anyway. I think if I could kind of fix this book for me, I'd actually take like the first 4 chapters and the last 4 chapters and just bin them and then leave it at that. Like I wasn't interested in this kind of weird Hitlery stuff. The ending didn't work, because how do you even end a book like this? Like she can't die, she just keeps rewinding. So how is that ever going to happen? And it didn't really work very well at all. But I love Kate Atkinson's writing. This is the second book of hers that I've read this year, and I'm definitely tempted to read more. Okay, 2 new favourites, 2 absolute favourites. Let's go for this. No real surprise to anybody who has been on my channel for a while, because we all know I'm obsessed with dinosaurs. It's Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. Crichton. Who knows? So I read this month. Finally got around to it. Can't believe it's taken me this long, and I loved it. Like, I know people, it has problems. I don't care. There are dinosaurs. I'm so on board. So I'm not going to say a crazy amount about this, because I am like horrendously biased about why I love this book and why I think it's a masterpiece, and why I'll hear nothing said bad about it, in the same way that I feel about all the movies. They are cinematic masterpieces, the greatest things to ever come out of film, and I will hear nothing to the contrary. So let's just leave it at this was 5 stars. I think it's great, but I do concede it has some negative points, and maybe not everyone would like it. Meh. So my new favourite book that I read this month, that is going to become definitely an all-time favourite, is It's All a Game by Tristan Donovan. This is a non-fiction book. It's a short history of board games, and it is as glorious and wonderful as that sounds. I really love board games. Andy's family is super into them. They've got me into them as well. We play a lot around Christmas time. We have a fairly big collection of 2 players in our house. We do board game evenings with some friends. And basically, this, as the name suggests, is a short history of how board games have evolved and how we've got to where we are now. It goes all the way back to chess and sort of some of the very original board games that you have in kind of ancient Egyptian time, and like really historical board games, and then goes all the way through up to modern day, where we have things like Pandemic and Settlers of Catan, and like the rise of the modern board game as such, and how that has been changed over the years. Each chapter is broken into different sections that kind of, sorry, the book is broken into different sections where each chapter looks at kind of a different specific board game in focus, and then what that meant for the board game kind of era, genre, etc. So we have ones on like chess, backgammon, but then like Cluedo, you've got Monopoly in there and the history of that. So good. Things like Mousetrap and the rise of more of the like plastic prop space board games, and then obviously you've got your more modern ones. There's a whole section about board games linked to sex and kind of sex games as such. You've got things like monogamy and what that sort of implied about society. It's linked with gambling, just so many cool exciting topics. And Tristan Donovan has a wonderful writing style. It was so natural and easy to read. I blitzed this in like a day. It was so freaking good. He also has another book which is about the history of video games I'm really keen to pick up, and he has a few more. One about the history of like fizzy pop and like soda, and then there's definitely another one and I can't remember what, but basically this guy's wicked. And if you have even a vague passing interest in board games and gaming and that kind of a world, then you should definitely read this. Okay, and that's it from me. Those are all the books I read in March. So I hope that you've enjoyed all the books that you've seen here. Subscribe if you like my content, or just watch a few more of my videos. I've got a ton now. It's very exciting. And I will chat to you soon. Have a wonderful reading week. Bye guys.